Here we go. Toss-up 1. In a film from this country, a man emasculates a large statue of a bull, and a climactic duel is fought with 2 gigantic pieces of ham. 2 girls lay with their heads on railroad tracks to listen for trains in a different film from this country, in which a girl finds a wounded soldier and confuses him.
Spain.
That's correct.
Good.
Bonus. Exact answer required for the first bonus part.
Oh boy.
This person is said to know that I had brought hard to extirpate from my soul the germs of love there detected, and now at the first renewed view of him, they spontaneously arrived green and strong. For example, I teach identify this person who is told I married him at the start of the last chapter of an 1847 novel.
The reader.
Yes. The title character of this Charlotte Bronte novel tells the reader that she married Mr. Rochester. Yes. Jane Eyre earlier asks the reader, do you know, as I do, what terror those cold people can put into the ice of their questions when this clergyman, her cousin, asks her if she won't marry him?
Is it Brockhurst or Brockhurst?
I think you're
St. John Rivers?
Or
St. John.
pick one. Gabe.
St. John Rivers.
Yes.
Good choice.
Sorry.
That's
You're
30.
Good teamwork.
Also 2. A uranium-containing submarine that ran aground near a naval base in this body of water was nicknamed Whiskey on the Rocks. An island in this body of water would have been the site of a massive resort of Prora.
Like the Baltic Sea.
Yes. And your bonus. These quasi-particles are typically introduced to explain the negative effective mass of electrons at the top of a valence band. For example, teach name these quasi-particles understood as localizations of positive charge with positive mass. They are the primary mode of current flow in p-type semiconductors.
Like holes, right? It's possible. Hole.
Yes, electron holes should not be confused with these antiparticles, which have the same mass and spin as the electron, but has a positive rather than negative charge.
Positron.
Holes should also not be confused with holons, one of the 3 quasi-particles that are created when electrons undergo this deconfining process. It occurs in Luttinger liquids and other one-dimensional metallic systems. Answer. Spin charge separation. 20 points. Also 3. Jaime Rosenthal founded a bank in this country that was the first foreign bank sanctioned by the U.S.'s Kingpin Act. The fruit company Fife supposedly denied rights to melon farmers in this country's southern city of Choluteca. An environmental activist from this country warned that the construction of the Agua Zarca Dam would endanger its indigenous Lenca people. This country's government imposed dusk-to-dawn curfews to quell protests over this suspicious defeat of opposition candidate Salvador Nasrallah. The murdered activist Berta Cáceres blamed Hillary Clinton for the 2009 coup that overthrew this country's president, Manuel Zelaya. For 10 points,
Honduras?
Yes.
Good job. John Negroponte.
Your bonus. Walter Johnson's River of Dark Dreams examines the political economy of this crop and its ties to the rise of a global capitalist system. For 10 points each, name this crop whose empire is the subject of a global history by Sven Beckert. It was called king in the antebellum South.
Cotton.
Yes, this state's economic reliance on cotton, grown with slave labor, led to many boycotts by abolitionists. For example, this state's Fruitlands utopian community banned the wearing of cotton, wearing only canvas.
That's importing it or the South Carolina? South Carolina.
Massachusetts. Most cotton in the U.S. is from the Gossypium hirsutum strain, which is thought to have originated in this country and is named as such. The U.S. aimed to avert a conflict in this country through a conference with the ABC powers.
Is this Egypt?
Egypt.
Mexico.
Oh.
10 points on that. Concept 4. This quantity and chemical shift are commonly calculated from the output of a 15N1H heteronuclear single quantum coherence spectroscopy. Taking the negative of the slope of a Scatcherd plot yields this quantity. This quantity has a much larger value for a porphyrin ring, or EDTA, compared to their open chain or monodentate analogs, according to the macrocyclic and chelate effects. The derivative with respect to the temperature of the natural log of this quantity is equal to the standard enthalpy change over RT squared, according to the Van 't Hoff equation. There is unusually no denominator in the expression for the solubility product form of this quantity. The Henderson-Hasselbalch equation yields the pH as a function
of pKa.
No. is a function of the acid dissociation type of these constants. For 10 points, name this quantity denoted K, which is equal to the ratio of products and reactants of a reaction in stasis.
Equilibrium constant?
Yes.
Should we contest that?
Yeah, we're gonna protest that.
All right, I'll mark it down. You said
Thank you.
pKa,
Yeah.
and you buzzed at as pH as a function.
I buzzed at pH as a function.
It's number 6. That came up?
And then keep that.
Something I
No,
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 no, my bad.
Yeah,
Okay,
I get it.
so protest is marked down. You guys get a bonus for now. The armchair variety of these structures have equal values for their M and N indices, for 10 points each. Name these allotropes of carbon that have a cylindrical microstructure. They are commonly used to create strong yet lightweight materials such as bicycle frames.
Nanotube.
The diameter of a carbon nanotube is proportional to the intensity of the radial breathing mode detected in this form of spectroscopy, which measures either the positive or negative shift in energy between the incident and emitted photons of a molecule.
EPS.
Raman spectroscopy. Carbon nanotubes solubilized in aromatic media can experience this non-covalent interaction, which occurs between adjacent phenylalanine, tyrosine, and histidine residues.
High back bonding.
Pi-pi stacking. 10 points. Toss-up 5. This play's author wrote that he was resisting the bourgeois conception of the immutability of the soul by having its characters be somewhat lacking in character. That essay lists possible motivations for one of this play's characters, including Midsummer Night Festivities, the aphrodisiac effect of the flowers, and her menstruation. In its preface, this play's author terms one of its characters modern, even though the man-hating half-woman has been around forever. The protagonist of this play repeatedly waltzed to help replace the normal division into acts. Its main character's plans to start a hotel are derailed when one decapitates the other's pet canary. Yes. Your bonus. Frank Gillen and Baldwin Spencer coined the common English term for this concept as a translation of the term Al-Charenga. For 10 points each, identify this mythical past in which the sky god Bayame and the hero Murunderi lived and the world was created.
I like it. Dreamtime.
Yes.
Good.
The Dreamtime is a creation period of this loosely defined group of indigenous inhabitants of Australia.
Yeah, Australian Aborigines.
In the creation story of Kakadu National Park, which is set during the Dreamtime, the man Ginga turned himself into a huge example of these animals. Makara, the Mount of Varuna, is often depicted as one of these real-life animals whose form was taken by 2 sons of Neith.
Crocodile.
Crocodile.
Yes. 30 points. Toss-up 6.
Cool mount.
The 2.5-hour keynote address that concluded this event began by praising Dorothy Height for helping organize it. The 20th anniversary of this event was commemorated by the Justice or Else rally. Federal Park Police ceased making crowd size counts after this event when they were threatened with a lawsuit for a low estimate of its attendance. Speakers during this event's Atonement and Reconciliation section included Benjamin Chavez, who coordinated it as head of the NAALS. Maulana Karenga wrote an anthology commemorating this event and the day of absence that took place simultaneously. Its speakers included the mayor of the city it took place in, Marion Barry,
March on Washington?
-5, and its main organizer, Louis Farrakhan. For 10 points, name this October 16, 1995 event, a large gathering on the National Mall by African-American males.
The Million Man March.
Yes. And your bonus. A 1906 explosion at Courrières claimed the lives of over 1,000 miners of this resource. For 10 points each, name this fossil fuel. After World War I, France invaded the Ruhr Valley to take advantage of its vast supply of this resource.
Coal. Yeah, coal.
This French socialist politician honored the dead miners in his newspaper L'Humanité. This man, who attempted to organize general strikes across Europe to delay the onset of World War I, was assassinated by the appropriately named Raoul Villain, or Villain, just before the war began. Answer.
Clemenceau.
Jean Jaurès. As Minister of the Interior, this other politician used military force to break up the strikes that followed the Courrières disaster. Earlier, his newspaper published an author's open letter criticizing Félix Faure.
Wow.
Answer?
Because he was the primary.
Comes out.
Yes.
Okay.
20.
His newspaper did jockeys.
Yeah.
Sad.
Yeah.
Toss-up 7. A complexity class whose name begins with this character was introduced in the computation of the permanent of a matrix of all zeros and ones, and contains all counting problems that correspond to a decision problem in NP. In Unix systems, files that will invoke an interpreter directive begin with this character. This character replaces a $sign at the end of a Unix command prompt with root access. In Perl, a $sign followed by this symbol accesses the last index of an array. This character and an exclamation mark comprises a shebang. Include directives in C begin with this symbol, which is appended to the names of several programming languages included in...
Like hashtag?
Yeah.
What's the actual name?
Number sign,
No, it has a
pound sign, sharp sign. Here's your bonus.
No, it doesn't have a name.
The opening sentence of this novel calls its setting a poem, a stink, a grating noise, a quality of light, a tone, a habit, a nostalgia, a dream. Ferdinand want to teach name this novel whose loose plot concerns the efforts of Mac and his band of misfits to throw a party for the marine biologist Doc.
Cannery Row.
Yes. This author painted a portrait of his native California in such novels as Cannery Row and Grapes of Wrath.
Steinbeck.
A significant chunk of the narrative of Cannery Row, such as it is spent describing the journey of Mac and the boys to collect these items, which the grocer Lee Chong accepts in exchange for supplies for Doc's party.
It's like canned shells. Shells.
Frogs. 20 points. 8. One of these poems states that the burden of a great sadness arises from realizing that what one is pursuing now was once nearer, truer, and joined to us with infinite tenderness. Another of these poems commands the reader to throw the emptiness out of your arms to add the spaces we breathe. A youth follows a lament to the mountains of primal grief in the last of these poems, which ends by imagining that we who think of ascending joy would feel the emotion that almost dismays us when a joyful thing falls. The speaker recalls how once in the grieving for Linos, first music ventured to penetrate arid rigidity in the first of these poems, which declares that beauty is nothing but... Yes. Bonus, an episode after his first appearance, this character fights the criminal mastermind Roman Torchwick with his signature gunchucks. Name this mythologically named character who accompanies Blake Belladonna to Menagerie, an island populated by human-animal hybrids called faunus, on the show Ruby.
What? Mythological inspired. Pick your favorite.
Answer.
Pan.
Sun Wukong. This franchise's protagonist takes his name from the Japanese reading of the name Sun Wukong. That protagonist, Son Goku, is capable of going Super Saiyan.
Dragon Ball Z.
Yes. Sun Wukong is one of nearly 100 gods in the multiplayer game Smite, whose objective is to destroy the other team's figure of this name. In another series, Eren Yeager fights beings of this name who breach the massive wall of Maria. 30 points. Alright, toss up 9. A work by this thinker analyzes the difference between the Greek verbs arcane and pratein to illustrate how rulers have monopolized the strength of others, creating a delusion of extraordinary strength. That work by this thinker discusses how men began to encounter instruments where they once found objective qualities following the discoveries of Galileo. This thinker argued that a conception of people as animal laborans has replaced one of them as homo faber in a work that analyzes the vita activa.
Arendt?
Yes. And your bonus. The first of these instruments was built by Bartolomeo Cristofori for 10 points each. Name this instrument whose prominent manufacturers include Steinway and Sons. It largely replaced the clavichord and harpsichord.
A piano?
Yes, most notes in a piano's range are produced by having a hammer hit this many strings. This many piano sonatas by Franz Schubert are grouped as his final ones and weren't published until over a decade after his death.
How many strings is it?
3 or 5.
3, 4? Is that 4?
Sure. I don't know.
4.
3.
Damn.
At the request of this performer, John Broadwood produced a piano with a range increased from 5.5 to 6 octaves. This Czech pianist changed the position at which pianists typically sat with regards to the audience.
What do you mean a Czech name? Janacek.
Jan Vladislav Dusek. 10 points in that.
Pretty close.
Toss up 10. A painting set in this city includes a woman in black and a red hat that its it includes a woman in black and red that its artist reused in a boy bringing bread. The city's buildings are shown in an exaggerated perspective in a small painting of a loot maker's stall that was most likely displayed in a special box. A sign that reads
Delft.
yes. Points. Bonus. This kind of marriage has many elements in common with the Sunni practice of misyar, for 10 points each, being this form of temporary marriage that is forbidden in Sunni Islam. Answer.
Say something.
Nikah al-Mut'ah. Mut'ah is primarily practiced in this branch of Islam, which forms the majority in Iran. Members of this branch believe that Musa al-Khadim succeeded Ja'far al-Sadiq as imam, unlike groups such as the Karmatians.
So she prompt, I guess.
Shia.
Prompt.
Yeah, it's like
12er.
Yes. In defending Mut'ah, Twelvers often note that it is permitted by one of these accounts of Muhammad and his companions' actions, and that Sunnis only forbid Mut'ah because Caliph Umar banned it.
This is hadith. That's probably
420.
I don't know what that
This is halftime now. I have a score of 220, 60.
No, you're right. From like the 2 weeks that
Then we can score.
Islamic class came out.
Probably can do.
Anyone keeping score?
Yes, 220,
220, 60.
Agreed.
And then
Are you subbing out now?
Yes. Farrah would complain about it all the time.
What?
Whenever we talk to people, she's like, it's just prostitution, and then she'd answer the question.
who said it?
There's a gym.
Yeah, but they're having them like any questions yet.
Not this one.
So we should
There hasn't been any. There's been like
Yeah, I
one
think
physics one,
yours.
yeah.
Okay.
It's your call. Rohan.
Yep. Okay, 2 subs.
Just painting. It can sign up whatever it does. All those notes send him a message.
All right, are you ready to go
Your next question.
with toss of 11?
Yep.
Before his work on the Enlightenment, progressive historian Carl L. Becker proposed a dual interpretation of this event. An early history of this event's rise, progress, and termination was written by Mercy Otis Warren. Radical leveling effects of this event are assessed in a 1992 book by Gordon Wood. Bernard Bailyn assessed the ideological origins of this conflict, which foreign powers used as a pretext to form the First League of Armed Neutrality. The lead up to and unfolding of this conflict takes up the last 5 volumes of George Bancroft's history. Robert Morris rose to prominence by obtaining foreign funding for this conflict, whose...
Revolutionary War?
Yes.
Which one? American War.
And your bonus. Like cuneiform, the writing system of this name made heavy use of heterograms. For example, the word for dog would be written as the equivalent of KLB, but was read as Sag, for 10 points each. Give the name for the Aramaic-derived script used to write Middle Persian. A man who took this word as his surname banned the use of the chadar cloak.
That's what we have to work with pretty much. Sorry.
It's oh my god.
Answer.
Defer.
Pahlavi script. The unrelated Pahlava script, also derived from Aramaic, ultimately gave rise to the writing system of this modern-day country, whose invention is legendarily credited to Ram Kamheng. Kings who ruled territory in this modern-day country include Nare Suan and Chulalongkorn.
You sure it's time?
Thailand?
This Mauryan king used the Aramaic-derived Brahmi script to write his rock edicts, which advocated non-violence in the wake of his brutal... Yes, that's 20
Yeah, so
points.
follow these scripts.
Toss up 12. Examples of the great type of these people venerated in Eastern Orthodoxy include Fyodor Tyro and Theodore Stratylades. Paul VI recognized Maximilian of Kolbe as one of these people of charity. A popular story discusses 10,000 of these people of Ararat who were led by Acacius. A faithful one named Antipas is mentioned in the Book of Revelation. Tertullian wrote that the seed of the church is equivalent to a substance from these people. Paulo Miki was among a group of 26 of them in Japan. An early Protestant history titled Acts and Monuments is popularly known as John Fox's Book of These People, and discusses...
Martyrs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Higher quest.
Bonus. Although Frederick Clements only recognized the climatic form of this concept, later ecologists identified edaphic, disturbance, and anthropogenic varieties as well. For example, teach identified this steady-state community that supposedly forms at the end of ecological succession. Answer.
Climax community? Climax community.
Yes, a catastrophic climax community, such as the vegetation in the chaparral of Southern California, is just as vulnerable as the initial community to this type of destructive event, often triggered by lightning strikes of trees.
Yeah, forest fire.
Succession is often studied by collecting these sets of soil or other environmental samples, which are assumed to differ only in age. Chronosequences.
Yeah.
20. Toss-up 13. Guanine pentaphosphate inhibits these sequences as part of the stringent response in bacteria. The activity of these sequences can be assessed by repeated mutagenesis in a technique called bashing. Sequences of this type derived from simian virus 40 and cytomegalovirus are commonly used in expression vectors. Bidirectional examples of these sequences, which are especially common in mammals, are abundant in CpG islands. The sigma 70 factor recognized as part of this sequence called the Pribnow box. In our
Promoter.
Yes. Bonus. Carol Lawrence, who rose to stardom as the first to play this character, has described how Jerome Robbins employed method-acting techniques to foment animosity among the cast. For 10 points each, name this character who titles a song that repeatedly uses an E-flat A tritone to express the singer's love.
Maria.
Yes, this composer wrote the music for Maria and the other songs in West Side Story. He directed the New York Philharmonic from 1951 to 1969.
Princeton.
This composer remade Maria into the song Almost Like Praying for a Puerto Rico relief concert.
Oh,
This composer of In the Heights created translations for the 2009 Broadway revival of West Side Story. Yes. 30 points. Toss-up 14. Gender scholars like Judith Tick cite this composer's quip that Impressionism was easy music for the sissies and obsessive opposition to feminine music as evidence of misogyny. The ending of a piece by this composer was described as strings violently prolonging a G major triad into eternity. The rock-strewn hills is the setting of the second movement of this composer's orchestral set number 2. In a piece by this composer, flutes play increasing atonal melodies as responses to 7 notes. Yes. A short story collection by this author opens with an account of his unsuccessful search for a volume that he read as a child, referred to only as the book. For 10 points each, name this author of that collection, Sanatorium under the Sign of the Hourglass. This author of The Street of Crocodiles was a Polish Jew who was murdered during World War II. This American author physically cut out sections of Schultz's The Street of Crocodiles to create his 2010 book sculpture Tree of Codes. This author of Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close wrote about a Polish shtetl in his novel Everything is Illuminated. Schultz's story Father's Last Escape ends with the narrator's dad turning into a crab-like insect in reference to the opening of this author's novella The Metamorphosis. 30.
Well done, Kate.
15. A character in this novella accuses another of being a blot of mustard or a fragment of underdone potato before threatening to swallow a toothpick. At the end of this novella, that character is described as practicing the total abstinence principle, and earlier witnesses Mrs. Filbert and Joe divide a bounty of teaspoons, boots, and bed curtains. In this novella, a giant wearing a green robe and rusty scabbard without a sword describes a vision of a vacant seat and a crutch without an owner. Its protagonist is asked, "Are there no prisons?"
Christmas Story?
-5. And are there no workhouses, while being shown 2 children named Ignorance and Want in this novella's 3rd stage. At the end of this novella, the protagonist sends a prized turkey to the family of his employee, Bob Cratchit, and becomes a second father to Tiny Tim. 14 points named this Charles Dickens novella about Ebenezer Scrooge. Yes. Bonus. Nicholas Calderon and John Hicks developed the new type of this field, for 10 points each, named this subfield of economics whose 2 fundamental theorems outline the conditions under which markets will reach a particular Pareto optimal outcome. Answer. Yes. This theorem is considered to be the 3rd fundamental theorem of welfare economics. It states that no ranked voting system can satisfy 3 fairness criteria.
Errors and possibility. Yeah.
Yes. This economist and Martha Nussbaum created the capabilities approach to welfare economics. He criticized the assumption that humans are only motivated by self-interest in his essay, Rational Fools.
He worked with Nussbaum. Okay. Sen?
Yes, that's all 30. Toss-up 16. Description acceptable. Policies with this objective are the subject of Matthew Connolly's book, The Fatal Misconception. A man best known for promoting policies with this objective, Deep Tyagi, was the first to symbolize it with an inverted red triangle. When a policy with this primary goal was too successful, Lee Kuan Yew's government established the Social Development Unit in Singapore in the 1980s. A policy with this goal resulted in the creation of a group known as Heijai. In the late 1960s, advocates of policies...
It's like population control.
Yes. Your bonus. This artist controversially portrayed Marie Bonaparte as a bronze phallus. For 10 points each, name this artist who made his American debut at the Armory Show with 3 oblong-shaped busts and the kiss, a rectangular sculpture of 2 embracing figures. Brancusi disputed U.S. Customs designation of the sculptures in this series as kitchen utensils and not art. A court later agreed that the sculptures in this series sufficiently represented flight.
Bird in space.
This painter's distinguished air shows 2 gay sailors and a husband and wife observing Brancusi's phallic sculpture Princess X. He used text and abstract forms to represent 9 of his friends in his poster portraits.
Arthur Dove, right?
Okay.
Dove?
Charles Demuth.
Damn.
Oh, wow.
It's a similar
20.
proportion.
Toss up 17. This adjective denotes a period of time beginning with Portugal's Carnation Revolution, which Larry Diamond postulated may be over in a 1996 paper. Pluriversal studies are advocated in a book about the making and unmaking of a place described by this adjective, written by Arturo Escobar. A regional contingency factor was key to bringing about a late 20th century period of democratization described by this adjective, according to a book titled For It by Samuel Huntington. This adjective names the sequel to Alvin Toffler's Future Shock. The punk subculture Riot Girl heralded an era of feminism denoted by this adjective. -5. Sociologist Anthony Giddens is a major supporter of politics described as this adjective way, which were advocated by Tony Blair. For 10 points, give this adjective that describes a less affluent world of non-communist, non-NATO countries.
Third.
Yes.
Third wave feminism.
Bonus 17. The design of the Celtic cross used in Ireland was based on high crosses sculpted on this island, which had circles around them. For 10 points each, name this island near Britain, where St. Columba founded a mission in the 6th century. Yes, the Synod of Whitby rejected the methods of Iona in favor of those of Rome to determine the date of this event.
Easter.
Yes, the 2 main sources of the Synod of Whitby are the history of Wilfrid and this 8th century author's Ecclesiastical History of the English People. 30. And plus 18. The Prose Edda uses such kennings for this place as wide mouth. In the Volsunga saga, a goddess who lives in this place gives a gift to Loki so that he can catch the dwarf Andvari. Swedes regarded a god who governs this place as an ancestor because he fathered Yngvi by an unknown sister wife. Bragi and a god who governs this place discuss poetic language in the Skaldskaparmal. Ran lives in this place. Yes. Bonus. This man distinguished field-dependent and field-invariant modes of reasoning to explain the divergent kinds of argument in different disciplines. For 10 points each. Name this philosopher who modeled practical arguments as claims with grounds, warrant, backing, possible rebuttals, and qualifiers in his The Uses of Argument. Answer?
Jones.
Stephen Tolman. The Uses of Argument presents an alternative to the highly formalized syllogistic form of this discipline. Quantifiers are attached to predicates in its first-order type.
Logic.
This much earlier philosopher developed the earliest known formal systems of modal and temporal logic, and he pioneered the use of hypothetical syllogisms. This author of the Book of Healing argued for the existence of the soul using his floating man argument.
Let's go with it.
Aristotle.
Avicenna.
Yeah, wow.
10.
Similar.
The protagonist of a novel by this author is too absorbed in thinking about how Keats felt being spurned by Wordsworth to notice that assassins enter the restaurant he's in and gun down a man at the next table. One of his protagonists swats at nettles that she imagines to be her past selves and her cousins. This author wrote a fictional psychiatric case study as an appendix to a novel in which John Logan falls to his death trying to rescue a child trapped in an unmoored hot air balloon. In his best-known novel, a man mixes up a letter apologizing to a woman with one...
McEwen.
Yes.
Bonus.
This practice rusteth the chisel and also rusteth the craft and the craftsman, for 10 points each. And is practice denoted by a Latin language word that ensures no man hath a good house of stone or a painted paradise on his church wall, according to Canto 45, which mentions it 21 times.
Denoted by a Latin word.
Answer. Usura. With Usura is one of the most frequently anthologized sections of this fascist American poet's cantos. Yes, the equally popular first section of the cantos, which begins and then went down to the ship, is narrated by this man. In an earlier poem, this mythological figure yearns to follow knowledge like a sinking star, beyond the utmost bound of human thought.
I think it's Tiresias. I don't know why I think that.
I like it. Tiresias.
Odysseus.
Yeah.
Of course.
And final toss-up. In 2002, Duke University lost the right to use one of these devices after losing a patent case against its inventor, former Duke professor John Mabey. Bonifacio, Pellegrini, and Narducci proposed that one type of these devices could operate in a single pass using SASE. That innovation was implemented at LCLS. One of these devices, found at the Stanford Linear Accelerator, and improves on the earlier method of inducing microbunching by trapping the output in a mirror cavity. A type of these devices uses a strong periodic magnetic field inside an undulator to produce synchrotron radiation over a very wide frequency range. That is the free electron type of them. These devices, whose first examples used a ruby crystal, work by producing a
Laser?
Yes. And final bonus. In an April Fool's column in 1975, mathematics writer Martin Gardner presented a purported counterexample to this theorem. For example, teach identified this theorem that gives the minimum number of hues that are needed to distinguish contiguous regions on a map. Yes. Though Francis Guthrie proposed the four-color theorem in 1852, it was only proven in 1976 by Kenneth Apple and Wolfgang Haken, and the first important mathematical proof to have this unique trait.
Just on all my computer.
Yes, the Scottish mathematician tried to prove the four-color theorem, showing that it is equivalent to the statement that no snark is planar. Separately, he incorrectly conjectured that every three-connected planar cubic graph has a Hamiltonian cycle.
Scottish? Wiles? Wiles?
This is Peter Guthrie Tate. 20 points on the final bonus. The score is 510 to 80. Good game, guys.
Good game.